All right, so you know that feeling. You open your investment portfolio and it's like, whoa, where'd all my money go?
Yeah, we've all been there. It's like an instant wave of panic, especially with those news headlines screaming about market crashes and recessions. Makes you want to just cash out and hide your money under the mattress.
Right. Makes you question every financial decision you've ever made. But I'm really glad we're diving into this today with Raimon's blog post as our guide, because he goes beyond the typical don't panic advice.
He does. And one of the things I appreciate about his approach is that he acknowledges the very real emotions involved in investing. He gets that it's not just numbers on a screen, it's our hard-earned money. And it's totally normal to feel anxious when it seems like those numbers are going in the wrong direction.
Exactly. So how do we reconcile those gut reactions, that urge to sell everything before things get worse with, well, making rational long-term decisions?
Well, Ramon uses a really clever illustration in his post. He includes these 3 graphs, right? And they all show the same market dip, but over different time frames. So in the first graph, you're zoomed in on just a few days. And what do you see? Total chaos. It's a roller coaster. Up, down, sideways. Makes your stomach churn just looking at it.
Okay, I'm starting to feel a little queasy just thinking about it.
Right. But then he zooms out a bit. Same dip. But now you're looking at it over the span of a year. And suddenly it's less dramatic. Still a dip, sure, but it's starting to look more like a blip on the radar.
Okay, so perspective matters. I like where this is going.
Exactly. And then he shows the same dip, but over 5 years. And you know what? You can barely even see it. It's just a tiny little squiggle in this otherwise upward trajectory. It's a powerful visual reminder that what feels catastrophic in the moment often becomes almost insignificant when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
It's like that saying, don't sweat the small stuff. But when it's your money on the line, it's all small stuff, right? So if these dips are really just small stuff in the grand scheme of things, shouldn't we be excited to buy the dip like it's a flash sale at our favorite store?
Logically, yes. A dip should have us thinking, bargain time, assets are on sale. But Ramon points out this fascinating paradox. Most people do the opposite when the market dips. They panic, they sell, often locking in losses.
So what's the disconnect? If it makes sense to buy low, why does it feel so counterintuitive?
Because market dips shatter our illusion of certainty. We crave control, and those sudden drops make us feel like we've lost it.
So if our gut instincts are steering us wrong, what's the alternative? Is there some secret formula to predict these market swings and time those buy and sell buttons perfectly?
Wouldn't that be amazing? Sign me up.
Yeah.
But Ramon actually challenges the idea that there is such a formula, especially when it comes to short-term market moves. He even says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that trying to predict the market in the short term is like trying to predict the weather. You might get lucky sometimes, but more often than not, you're going to get rained on.
Okay, so no crystal ball. I'm starting to see why we shouldn't check our portfolios every 5 minutes. But if we can't predict the future, why does Raimon seem so confident about the long-term potential of the market? He mentions that the economy, despite all these ups and downs, has this clear upward trend over time. Explain it to me like I'm 5. Why keep investing when it often feels like gambling?
And you know what? Raimon does this brilliantly. He has this knack for making these complex economic concepts relatable, and he does it with a really simple example. He talked about how we communicate, right? Like, think back to the days of snail mail. That was the only way to connect with someone far away. Slow, inefficient, right?
Yeah. My kids would have a meltdown if snail mail was our only option.
Right. And then came phone calls. Still pretty good, but not instant. Then fax machines, which honestly were more trouble than they were worth. But now we can have instant video chats with anyone, anywhere in the world, often for free. The point is, the way we communicate has become exponentially more efficient over time.
Okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this.
Exactly. And just like communication, the economy as a whole tends to become more efficient over time. We constantly find ways to do more with less. Think about energy efficiency, for example. We can now light up our homes using a fraction of the energy it took just a few decades ago.
And because we're doing more with less, that should, in theory, lead to
growth. Even with the dips and crashes, the overall trend of the global economy has been upward for over a century. Now, Ramon does acknowledge that this upward trend doesn't always translate to us feeling amazingly wealthier, even with all this increased efficiency.
Yeah, that's a conversation for another deep dive for sure. But I'm curious, so we're constantly refreshing our portfolios, freaking out about every market dip when maybe we should be looking at the bigger picture, the long game. But then Ramon makes another bold claim that I have to ask you about. He says that uncertainty actually decreases over time. This seems counterintuitive to, well, how most people experience the world, myself included. Am I missing something? It's funny you should say that because to illustrate this whole uncertainty thing, Ramon uses examples that are about as far from a serene stock market graph as you can get. He talks about COVID, which, wow, talk about global curveball, and the war in Israel last October. Heavy stuff, but it makes you think.
Right. And his point is that before those events, yeah, there was a sense of stability, but looking back, it was kind of an illusion. Like, we didn't even know what we didn't know. We weren't prepared for a pandemic on that scale or, well, for the kind of conflict we saw unfold.
We were living in a bubble, basically, and then, boom, reality check.
Exactly. But here's where Ramon flips the script. He argues that after these events, as traumatic as they were, we actually had more information.
Okay, I'm listening.
We learned, often the hard way, how to handle a pandemic, how to adapt and cope in a wartime situation. The range of possible outcomes, while still uncertain, narrowed because we had lived through it. It's like we got handed a crash course in things we never wanted to learn about.
It's like that saying, experience is what you get right after you didn't need it. But in this case, it's experience that could prove invaluable down the line.
Exactly. And Ramon connects this back to the market by saying that, yeah, unexpected stuff will always happen, but every time we go through one of these cycles, a recession, a war, some unforeseen global event, we build up this bank of experience. We don't know what the future holds, but we have a better idea of what's possible and how to navigate those possibilities.
So it's not that the world becomes less uncertain. It's more that we become maybe less intimidated by it. Like every market freak out adds a tool to our resilience toolkit, which honestly makes me feel a little better about the inevitable ups and downs.
That's a great way to put it. It's not about eliminating uncertainty. It's about building our capacity to navigate it. And those market events, those curveballs life throws our way, they become less about panicking and more about, okay, we've seen something like this before. What did we learn? How can we apply that knowledge now? It's like Ramon is subtly shifting our perspective from fear to a more informed, proactive kind of preparedness.
It's almost like he's saying, don't just ride out the market waves, learn to surf them. And you know what? That actually makes me think about another point Ramon makes in his blog post, something that seems completely unrelated, but when you think about it, ties in beautifully with this idea of making smart choices for long-term benefit. It has to do with something we all encounter every month, those electricity bills.
You're right, there is a connection. Ramon's blog post isn't just about stock markets. It's about applying a long-term lens to our everyday financial lives as well. And he brings up a perfect example of this with the recent changes in Israel's electricity market, something many people might not even be aware of. It's now open to competition.
So for those of us who don't speak fluent energy policy, what does this actually mean, and what's the takeaway for our listeners?
Simply put, for a long time, there was just one major provider in Israel when it came to electricity. You paid your bill, that was that. But now, multiple companies are vying for your business. And as we know from, pretty much every other industry, competition is a good thing for the consumer.
More choices, more competitive pricing, that makes sense. It's like choosing between different cell phone providers instead of being stuck with whatever the one option is.
Exactly. And Ramon highlights how surprisingly easy this switch can be. He even mentions that it's often easier to switch electricity providers than it is to change cell phone carriers. He jokes that people change phone companies for all sorts of reasons, not all of them logical or financially sound.
I love that he mentions that because there's a bit of irony in his blog post. Ramon himself can't switch providers, even though he advocates for it.
Right. He confesses that he's technically classified as an energy producer himself because of his solar panels. It's a funny little anecdote, but it really underscores his point. For most of our listeners, this is a very real opportunity. You don't have to be a financial expert or spend hours researching complex investment strategies. You can literally save money by making a simple choice, potentially today.
So besides supporting Ramon's personal energy-producing endeavors by sticking with the big provider, what kind of savings are we actually talking about here? Is it worth the effort of making a switch?
Well, Ramon, being the numbers guy he is, actually breaks down some potential savings. He recounts a conversation he had where someone mentioned saving 700 shekels annually just by switching providers. That might not seem like a huge amount at first glance, but then Ramon does what he does best. He zooms out. He reminds us that even small, consistent savings can really add up over time.
It's like those compound interest charts that get trotted out whenever anyone talks about investing, that whole slow and steady wins the race philosophy.
Precisely. What seems insignificant in the short term can make a surprising difference over the long haul. And what's so compelling about this particular tip is that it's actionable right now. You don't need to predict the stock market or master complex financial instruments. You simply need to take a look at your electricity bill and see if there's a better deal out there. It's a powerful reminder that financial savvy isn't always about big, flashy moves. It's often about paying attention to those everyday expenses, those little leaks in our financial ship, and finding ways to plug them.
This ties back perfectly to what you were discussing earlier about market uncertainty. It's about thinking long-term, making small, consistent choices that ultimately lead to greater financial well-being, whether that's weathering market volatility or simply optimizing our monthly expenses. Small steps, big impact.
Absolutely. And this dovetails perfectly with Raimond's overarching message. It's about playing the long game in all aspects of our financial lives. He's not just urging us to think about what might yield a quick win today. He's encouraging us to make choices that our future selves will thank us for, whether it's writing out market dips, switching electricity providers, or consistently contributing to our savings. It's about aligning our actions with our long-term goals.
And sometimes those small, seemingly insignificant choices can turn out to be the most impactful decisions we make. Raimond has given us a lot to ponder today when it comes to our relationship with money, uncertainty, and the power of embracing a long-term perspective.
He really has. And on that note, it seems like a good time to transition to our final thought-provoking question for this deep dive. Something for our listeners to chew on as they navigate their own financial journeys.
So for our listeners who are ready to put Raimond's wisdom into action, what's one small step they could take today that their future selves would high-five them for?
What a great question to end on. It could be something as simple as checking your electricity bill and seeing if there's a better deal out there. Or maybe it's finally setting up that automatic transfer to your investment account that you've been meaning to do.
Or maybe it's just resisting the urge to check your portfolio every time the market dips and trusting that over time, those blips won't matter as much as we think they do in the heat of the moment.
Exactly. It's all about making choices that align with our long-term goals, even when they don't feel particularly glamorous or exciting. Because ultimately, those small, consistent actions are what make the biggest difference in the end.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those small steps you can take towards a brighter financial future. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of investing, energy savings, and the power of long-term thinking.
Until next time.